Welcome to Sat Media featured interview with Bill Suhayda. He's the author of From Tyranny to Liberty. Bill, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And you wrote a book about, obviously, the role of communism and your experiences with it. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get rolling into the book.
What I can tell you is that I have a 34-year career in education and biology teacher, also coach, wrestling and soccer coach. Still doing the soccer with my son at Wabansie Community College.
Okay.
He's the head coach and he's my boss now. Because of my background and where I come from, I'm very concerned about where this country's going. I wrote the book, mostly it started out more like a journal kind of a thing, and then it progressed and it got legs and became a book. But the reason for the book basically is because of my early childhood and having to escape communist Hungary. So that was a big part of my life early on, and continue to kind of identify who I am, especially recently because of what I'm seeing in this country now. And for a while I just became a regular old American educator, but more recently because of what is going on in this country, it raises that early childhood concern that I remember having when we were just escaping, and I was only 7, but my parents, of course, were talking about it with my grandparents and relatives and neighbors, and so I was sopping it up a little bit, although children were not supposed to be around when parents were talking about those kinds of things. But I always had an ear on it, and so now that I'm seeing what I'm seeing here, all of that comes back to me now, and the concern of coming to a free country and seeing this country also now going that direction, but I'm kind of segueing here a little bit.
No, that's fine.
Basically, it's an identifying kind of an experience that has kind of consumed me a little bit, actually, and so the book was written for journalistic and family historical purposes, but now it's becoming something that I refer to in terms of talking with people, and I do some speaking engagements. That has been kind of put on the back burner because of COVID, so that kind of thing stopped. But I do have a few more things coming up I should say, in the near future here. I'm talking with a group concerning immigration and things like that. So it's becoming something that I'm doing that plays right along with exactly with what's happening in this country.
So over the last, I would say, more than 60 years now, there's been people in our government and other authors and educators that have tried to highlight America's communist infiltration, in a sense, that's taken place on a very, very slow basis. And people like you who put those personal experiences out there to help other people understand, because right now I don't think there's a lot of people who understand where we are. They think we're the same country we were 25 years ago or 30 years ago.
Yeah, I don't think we are.
Right.
I mean, it's changing, and very drastically. And the CCP and China have a lot more to do with this than people know, I think. We have our oligarchs, our large money people who are allied with them, in fact, and they see, of course, they saw China as a huge market, and so even our American corporations are falling right in line with all of this, and it's almost like they're all they see is money. They don't realize that we're changing as a country. Originally, I think Bill Clinton thought that if we got the Chinese involved with us, that we could turn them capitalistic. And I think no, exactly. We are now being taken over,
Right.
indoctrinated, and I hear people say things like, well, they have such an efficient system, they can turn their economy around on a dime, because, well, it's a dictatorship, so it doesn't take a collective group of people. A representative form of government is slow. It's like a huge ship that takes a half an hour to turn, because there's a lot of people that are involved in the decision making. In a dictatorship, one person does it, boom, we're done.
Yeah.
And we don't care what the people thought.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And if that's the kind of government we want, then the Chinese model fits it. I think that is a very dangerous road to go, because then people lose their power. We no longer have representation. We are just told what to do, and we're cogs. We are not allowed to think, because to run a country in a representative form, of course, then you have the people sending their representatives to a place where those decisions are made and hashed out and so forth. But when you get a Pritzker, then you can turn it around on a dime, because this is what we're doing today and tomorrow, and you can't say anything about that. So COVID is actually another agent that has changed this.
Yes.
No, if you don't want to wear that mask, you're killing people. And that shaming and that getting people to feel guilty that they actually have a mind and think, and that's the mind control. That's the attack on First Amendment, et cetera.
Yes, yes. So let's take a step back and start looking at the book a little bit. So
Sure.
It's your account of what you experienced in Hungary as a child and immigrating to the United States. So obviously there are some similarities. So what did you experience, and what do you see that's taking place here that might be pretty darn close to it?
Loss of civil liberty. And communists tried to produce a utopia, or at least that's the excuse they use, I think.
Right.
You know, very oftentimes they use language in a way to make themselves look, how should I say, like they're trying to do the right thing.
Right.
It's a ruse. What they want is power and control. And so that's what I'm seeing happening with us. And COVID has brought this in it's a perfect storm for them to create this. We only want the good things for you. And this will be good and that will be good. In the process, you lose your civil liberties, of course, but that's okay. You'll get them back later. But in my way of thinking, if government can give you your freedoms and then they can take them away from you,
Right.
you're really not free. That Constitution should not be suspended because some people think we have an emergency. And it's been used that way.
Right. And a lot of, the founders of this nation, those that did create the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, they literally dealt with a pandemic during that whole time.
Yeah.
As they were writing it. Smallpox was obviously a true terrible pandemic.
Right.
And they made sure that even under their writing that it would never suspend that document.
Right.
And their intention, of course, would be that now, fast forward several hundred years later, it's not going to happen.
Correct. Yeah.
So, so what did you see in Romania as far as
Hungary.
Hungary.
Yeah.
I don't know why I said Romania. Hungary. That
Hungarians get a little sensitive about being called Romania.
Yeah, I would imagine so, right?
Yeah, they got a big chunk of Hungary after World War I. So,
what did you see from the media? Obviously, the media is a huge arm of communist rule. So.
and that's one of the first institutions that they take over is the media, because propaganda is powerful. What you put into people's minds is powerful, and you repeat it. This goes along with my profession.
Right.
Education is repeating information, maybe in different ways in order to get that across. And young people, of course, suggest it, but maybe I cut you off.
No, you're perfectly fine.
So media has aligned with government now. And whether the government took media over or whether or not media voluntarily joined, I don't know. But it doesn't matter. The fact is that they're a cabal.
Right.
And so that's very powerful when you control information. When the First Amendment and the freedom of the press originally was designed to be a watchdog over the powerful. And what we have now is the media actually saying that what the government is doing is right, and they've taken sides politically, and so they are with the left in this country, as you know, and that's dangerous. And along with that is big tech has come along, and now they're a part of it, and so it becomes a very powerful thing to resist and to prevent from controlling the country. The left is very conniving in that way. They have us by the throat, basically. And we have to turn that around.
Right. The pyramid of government, in a sense, should be from the people down to the government, but they believe it's the opposite, where it's the government is over the people and it trickles down.
Well, you can't build your utopia if you let too many people have ideas.
Sure. As you were a child in Hungary, what kind of media exposure was there? What did you hear? What did you?
Well, there was a national radio broadcast that we were the one that we were allowed to listen to. You can't stop radio waves. So the people could turn to channels that brought in information from the West,
right.
But that was illegal. It was illegal to listen to any words from other than government, official government kind of radio.
Right.
And in fact, I remember very distinctly my parents listening to Radio Free Europe. I'm not quite sure where that was being broadcasted from, but it wasn't from Hungary. But people were not allowed to. Now, how do you prevent people from doing that? Well, you really can't. But what communist regimes do is they, to make sure that they don't have to hire too many spies, they get their citizenry to spy on each other. And what they do basically is, if you hear something that is not right and not according to what we say, report it. So then your neighbor becomes your spy as well, especially if you're not getting along with them. And it also fractures the society. So people can't come together and say, hey, we got to get together, we got to change something. That can't happen if your neighbor could be an informant. And of course, there are bounties on those kinds of things. There's rewards for turning people and doing the wrong thing. So I remember my parents listening to the radio, but the volume was down, and they would hunker around the radio. And I thought that was kind of curious. I probably even asked why they were doing that, but they didn't really tell me, I don't think. Maybe they did. I don't remember really, but I do remember that. And one of the ways in which you can make sure that your society goes the way you want it is to make sure you control information.
Right. Yeah. Right. So the media, one of the things, or actually not even the media, communism in general, let's just focus on that. One of the things they try to do is divide. And I don't think they've had a successful revolution or infiltration without that division taking place.
Right.
And in the United States, obviously, we're divided on race, we're divided on religion, we're divided on politics. And even now, we have, related to the COVID situation, divided on vaccinations and masks and everything else. So at the time you were in Hungary, was there, because it's more of a unified country in a sense, so it's more difficult to divide them, but
correct.
Did they try?
Oh, definitely, and that was one of the ways. And again, there's became a very poor country, and people who turned other people in were rewarded. Some of it was by force. There was a very famous soccer player in Hungary at that time. He was probably considered the best player in the world at that time. His name was Puskás. And of course, that team traveled around the world to play in World Cup kind of competitions. And they took him and they sat him down and said, "You are our spy."
Oh, really?
Yeah. And we want to know which of your teammates is talking about defecting, etc. Because, of course, it was not allowed. It's against the law to leave the country.
Right.
Okay? Otherwise, if they don't make it against the law, everybody leaves. At least a good portion.
Right.
So they got him, and I only heard about this from my cousin, who lives in Hungary right now. He told me about this, and so of course, how do you make sure that he will do the spying and is honest about it? And he says, well, if we find out that one of your teammates is thinking this way, and you don't tell us, we have your family, and they will suffer. And so if you don't want your family to suffer, you better do a good job.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
that's the way they did things.
Right.
And here in our country today, talking about fracturing, I mean, and that's why everything is racist. And so that you and I all of a sudden became white supremacists overnight because that's the way we were identified. I worked with black, Hispanic kids. Dominant population of East Aurora is Hispanic and black. Those are my students. Whoever walked into my classroom was a student of mine and was worthy of my my efforts to educate. And I didn't distinguish between races. They were all my kids, all my athletes. But all of a sudden, just because of my color of my skin, I became a white supremacist very quickly since I've been retired, because I have a conservative point of view on how things should be, and that's how they fracture us.
Right.
And so I want to resist that, but I don't know how to do that actually, because I'm not in control of it. When people, and I've lost friends that we were good friends, but they happen to be on the other side of the ledger in terms of politics. And one of them actually started to call me a white supremacist. You know.
Really?
And I've had students of mine also, former students that have that kind of like, oh, coach, you can't be like that. You know, that's wrong, and blah blah blah. And I lost a couple of those kinds of relationships as well. And no amount of explaining my position helps, because all of that has been demonized. And so we're being fractured by a third person. And most of these people are in the media and government.
And a lot of people don't quite realize that under communism, that technique to fracture people, you know, the projection of it, is they literally, what they are, they project it onto you to say you are. Yeah. And it's like he's not really a gentleman, but a man like Saul Alinsky in America, who established the communist platform in a sense.
Right here in Chicago.
Yeah, right here in Chicago. Yeah. And that was one of his key points, is get that, and it was a perfect fracturing tool.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Demonize and dehumanize your opponent. And then you can get people to believe what you're saying. Yeah. You first have to infiltrate their mind and re-educate them if not, they're already not. And most people are not educated about it, so they start to listen. Especially if you're attacking people they think might not be good. So the first target for Lenin were the rich. Those people are oppressing you. We have to hate them. Right. It's an indoctrination that occurs. And this indoctrination is now in our schools. and it used to be at the university level. Now it's at the grade school level, and that's critical race theory.
Right.
They're literally teaching kids that the white kid in the classroom is keeping the black kid down. These are children who should be on the playground and they should
Playing, enjoying each other.
And to get rid of race, then you let people come together in activities that they have in common, and they see each other as human beings first, not as a race.
Right.
But we are supposed to now look at sex and race or identity as Joe Biden, Brandon is telling people that I'm going to appoint the first black female to the Supreme Court. It's sexist, it's racist, by their definitions.
Sure.
It's unconstitutional. Instead of just saying, I'm going to try to pick the best person, and then if he wants to put in a black female who has the qualifications, then that woman will be looked upon more favorably.
Sure.
But because the first two criteria had to do with her sex and her race, what does that make? How does that qualify her? And so it diminishes her ability to do her work.
Exactly.
Because then people just look at her that way, as a black female. They don't look at her as a competent, qualified individual. So Biden basically cut her legs out with half the population in this country.
Yeah, even I would say there's a large part of the population now that looks at her as maybe something that is there to institute some kind of radical element,
yes,
instead of being a judge like she should be.
Exactly.
And that's probably correct.
Yeah,
I would imagine.
And that's another thing that they eliminated. And my parents talked about this one, that we are no longer a meritocracy. And that's how they flip societies. Because as soon as the communists came in, right after the Second World War, the janitor became the boss, and the boss became the janitor. They flipped everything, and that's how they get people out of power that were there before, and they rewrite the whole thing. So it didn't go by merit and who knew what to do. It had to do with just changing who was there for political reasons. And so my dad said the whole country went into the toilet right away, because that's the way they did it. And by the way, FDR is the individual that gave all of Eastern Europe to Stalin.
Yes.
And when he did that, then all the tanks rolled into all of the Eastern European countries, and then became the Soviet Union, and they produced the Cold War. And some people may not like the fact that I've said FDR did that, but that's the history.
Well, facts are facts.
Yeah.
So
that's the history. And then we got into a Cold War, of course, for how many years, and which was not good for anybody.
And if you look at post-war United States, FDR was very
leftist,
clear on policy that would be almost communist in nature.
Yeah.
Some of the things he did.
Well, he said he was going to bring this country out of a depression, which we were in, but he created government jobs, which had a certain amount of money behind it, and when the money was gone, the job was gone.
Right.
The way to develop wealth is through a private sector that continues to try to stay in business. They produce a product which people buy, and then then the market runs the economy, not a government. And that's the problem. And this is why communist countries are poor. The money that they take from the people create the jobs, and then they give the money back. So there's no wealth creation. It's just wealth redistribution.
So let's rewind a little bit and go back to your time in Hungary.
Yeah.
And there was probably a moment which your family, I don't know how much of your family, decided we have to leave. Yeah. And obviously you came to the United States. So what was that transition like?
For me, it was not very difficult. I have two other brothers that children adjust really very quickly. Right. We're still absorbing a lot, and we're into the mode of understanding our world. But for my parents, it was much more difficult, of course. So we assimilated pretty easily. It was sink or swim when we got to in schools because there was no bilingual program or anything like that. We basically learned English fairly quickly. I think within a year, all of us were speaking fairly well.
Right.
And so for us, the transition was not very difficult. As a family, however, we left everything there. I mean, what we brought was what was on our backs, basically. And so my parents worked very hard to get to a place where they could afford to buy a house and cars and do all of the things that you do to be in the society. That takes a little bit of money, a little bit of time to get. And my dad, I think, was 38, and my mom was 29 when we got here, and so it was a daunting to start all over again.
As you mentioned, communist nations don't really want you leaving. Right. How did they get out?
How did we get out?
Yeah.
Well, we crossed over the Austrian-Hungarian border.
Okay.
Okay. And we had to travel a ways to get there. We were on the southwest portion of the country. Austria is in the northwest portion of the country. So we kind of went north. And interestingly enough, Austria had just gained its independence from the Soviet Union a year before. For whatever reason, Khrushchev allowed the Austrians to no longer be in the Soviet Union. They allowed them to go with the West.
Right.
Had that not happened, I probably wouldn't be here right now.
Right.
Because the only other areas that you could go to escape the country were other communist countries. So my dad didn't want to go to Yugoslavia because Yugoslavia was Tito. Tito ran that place, and he was afraid that we escaped there. He's just gonna
maybe even a worse situation.
Well, he was not an ally of Moscow. He was somewhat independent,
right.
But he was afraid that, well, how about if Tito wants to fall into Moscow's favor and he'll return Hungarians, and that would be a nice thing for him to do. Of course, if that would happen, he would be jailed or worse.
Right.
So, but getting back to the leaving, my mom resisted it very much,
oh, really?
but not for political reasons, of course. Her maternal instincts were to make sure that her children were safe. This was not going to be safe. A lot of people were killed crossing the border. The border, we heard, was mined. Then we also heard that many of the mines were picked up by the resistance in the revolution. But maybe you didn't pick them all up.
Right.
So, if you don't, unless you have a map of where these things are, the coordinates, maybe you don't get all of them. Right. But that was a deterrent too to people if they hear that
hearsay can be. Yes.
The border is mined. You want to do that, really? There's also snipers. They erected towers back in probably very first months of the regime back in right after World War II, and they had snipers that so anybody approaching could be seen for a long distance. A lot of people tried by night, what we were going to do, but there were what was called Stalin Flares, and they even named them that because of the fact that they were produced so that these flares were shot up in the air and, of course, exploded, and you'd have a bright light illuminating the area for miles, right. And you could see people then, unless they were hunkered down somewhere. And they shot people. They had orders to shoot to kill, and so big deterrence, right. So that should tell all people in the world that if you have to threaten people with that kind of force to keep people in your country, you don't have a very good country.
Right. Right. Yeah. So as a child, being involved in that situation, were you generally scared, or was it one of those, well, I'm not sure what's going on? And
It was more like, I'm not quite sure what's going on,
okay.
although I was aware of the danger.
Right.
But I trusted my parents.
Right.
I didn't think that my parents would ever put me in a position where I might lose my life. That didn't register. So I felt confident that things were going to be okay. My mom was not that confident. Yeah. My dad was a military man. He was a fighter pilot
Okay.
in World War II against the Russians, in the Eastern Front. He's a man that took risk, obviously. You don't become a fighter pilot if you're not willing to take risk.
Right.
And once he made up his mind about things, that's just the way it was going to be. That's just who he was. He didn't see obstacles. He saw resolution, how to solve things. He didn't look at what might stop him. He looked at what good will come out of my decision. That's just the way he always operated. My mom was in consternation about that. She thought, well, have you thought about how much this will cost, the dangers, and blah blah blah. So my mom was sort of the other side of the question, oftentimes.
Right.
But when it came right down to it, my mom was a stubborn German, and the way I describe my dad, he's a crazy Hungarian. And interestingly, they got it done, though. I mean, and so that when my dad said, "We're going," and my mom eventually said,
"All right,"
capitulated to that.
Right.
And we did. So, but it's a good thing that he did. And sometimes you have to take risk in life.
Right.
You can't always play it safe. And if you're always trying to play it safe, you're really not going to do any more than average or maybe below average. And I know this as an athlete and as a coach. I tell my athletes, you got to take risks to be a champion. You can't be a champion playing it safe. You got to put it on the line because the other guy's going to. And if you don't match that force, then you're not going to win. So
are your parents still with us, or?
My dad died in 2010. He was 91 years old.
Okay.
My mom died 3 years ago.
Okay.
What was it? February 14th, was it? 16th. Thank you.
So, if you look at today, where we are right now as a nation, supposedly a free nation, but that's no longer the case.
I don't think we are.
Yeah, I don't think we are either. What do you think your parents would say or think about where we are current right now?
They would be shocked. Yeah. And sad.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, we don't really have anywhere else to run to at this point.
Correct.
Right?
I mean, we've been the safest and freest country for a long time. Take a look at Europe. Europe's always in some kind of turmoil. And that has to do with just the way Europe has been in terms of the populations of people and their strong nationality, strong patriotic nationalism. And so the border disputes have always been there. It's just the way Europe has been. And even today, you can see it. Russia wants Ukraine back. And you go back in history, and Ukraine was part of Russia. And speaking of changing borders, after World War I, Hungary was before World War I was a pretty powerful alliance with Austria. Austria-Hungary was a very strong nation. After the war, Hungary lost Hungary's lost 2/3 of their territory and a half of their population.
Wow.
Yeah, which is part of why Second World War occurred, because Germany got chopped up a little bit too, not nearly to the degree that Hungary was, but it was very easy for Hitler to say, "Let's go get our land back. They took it from us. Let's get these reparations off our backs," because they were also monetarily penalized for the war. And so that created a huge depression. There was a depression here in the U.S. There was also a depression in Europe. It was a worldwide depression, actually. And so, so for a demon like Hitler to just start talk about, hey, let's get our land back, let's get our economy back. These people are and he was actually right. What they were doing was wrong. And so the First World War became the Second World War. It was the sequel.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you wrote the book, I think you had mentioned that you wrote it as kind of a personal account just for yourself.
Right.
And it's obviously can be more. So when you look at your book now, what would you like people to, of course, read it, but what would you like them to understand from it?
I don't think it's a political book, really. I mean, you can see the politics in it. I didn't want to make it a political book because it was going to be for family and more a family history. But obviously, the events reflect the situation on the ground in terms of what was happening in the country.
Right.
I would like for people to recognize what we were fleeing. And I go into some detail, especially in the footnotes that I have about what was going on. I'd like for people to understand the struggles of people trying to leave those kinds of places. Also wanted to add some humility to it. I mean, I have a couple of chapters in there about war kind of circumstances in which, it's actually life-affirming rather than killing. One had to do with a German pilot who was in a battle with an American, and they shot each other out of the air. Both of them landed in the Mediterranean and then collaborated to save each other's lives.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was. It was a very interesting story. It's something that my dad told me. His commanding officer was the German pilot. And the German pilot could have left the American to die because he was wounded. And in his life, not preserver, but the little like dinghies that they had, didn't inflate.
Okay.
And so he was going to drown. And so he picked him up. The German Nazi, and they call them Nazis. Well, people in the Luftwaffe were a little different. They didn't like Hitler. They did what they did because they were soldiers. They had to do it. And so he saved this American's life. Yeah, and my dad saved an American from some people in a village that saw him parachute out of an airplane that had been shot down, ground-to-air fire. It was a B-17 or something like that, and the crew had left the plane, parachuted out, and these people, of course, angered by the fact that they're being bombed, who wouldn't be angry, right? Went to kill him. And my dad came upon the scene and told them to, had his revolver out and said that they should leave him alone. And he actually sent for help, for medical help for him because he was wounded.
I see.
So the war stories I tell there are not about anger and hate and killing, but man's humanity to man, perhaps.
Right. Yeah, the hope of people dealing with each other. So, your book, where can people find it? Where can they get it?
It's on Amazon, and there's a website. And should I tell you?
Yeah, please do.
It is www.tyrannytoliberty.us.
.us, okay.
Yeah.
So you can buy it off the website or Amazon, whichever you find.
And if you go to the website, then you can then access Amazon there's a
Oh, right through it, a
thing
link.
to punch, a link, yeah.
I see, very good. So, Bill, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would hope people do get a better understanding of what happened and what is happening through your book, and I highly recommend that they do so. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.